documenting the progress on this. It's a 1969 MGB-GT, and I've had this car for a few years now, and I really haven't done anything with it. I haven't started. The car is in the exact shape I bought it in, which is pretty rough. You can see we got some holes in the firewall from the previous owner. We got a lot of damage, well, customization we'll call it. This whole section here is beat in for transmission clearance. You can see some here too. Frame rail's been massaged. I think the guy I bought it from had a Nissan KA24 turbo motor in it, which doesn't quite fit, obviously. And they cut the frame rails and did this jankiness here to mount a big front mount intercooler. And all of this work is just not good at all. You can see they've added motor mounts, and the motor mount itself is welded to this car's a unibody with the frame rail and the subframe here that bolts in. Well, I guess it welds in now, so I'll have to cut all that stuff off and fix it. There's these 4 big main bolts that connect the subframe to the frame, and well, this one's been replaced with a tiny little one for whatever clearance issue they were having. They cut the inner fenders out again for that intercooler clearance. So not in the best shape. It's been repainted a few times. It looks like it was originally a red or orange car. Then it got painted this British Racing green. And then it got repainted this like matte green with a lot of metallic in it. Obviously it was taped up really well. It's got a little body damage. It's not rusty, which that's the main thing. It does have a little bit of rust, but there's no structural rust. There's been some bodywork repair. Not the best. There's a hump right here, if you can see. You look down it, yeah. There's some filler that is flaking off in places. You know, typical old car stuff. Inside is just about as rough as the outside. Somebody has tried to do some upholstery work, but if you can see, well, those are drywall screws. So I'll probably gut most of this. I'm going to put some fixed back seats in it, and I'm going to build a cage. Well, not a full cage. We'll say a 4-point roll bar. But let me show you my favorite part of this car from the previous owner. Yep. Drywall screws and Romex for these speakers, which, you know, is just the absolute perfect wire to use in automotive application. So I'll reinstall this, obviously, because, you know, that's what you want. Let's see. We got the trunk with a little bit of surface rust from, I guess, getting wet. Actually, I didn't notice any of that before, so we'll dig into that, see how bad that is. Hopefully, no, this is... We're going to forget we saw that. But moving on, this is the engine that's going to go in this car. This is a, I don't remember the year, 2014, 2015-ish Yamaha FZ-09, 3-cylinder, obviously. You see 3 exhaust pipes there, 3 coils. I've already started, I've scanned this engine a long time ago. This wasn't a bike I had that I loved, but I wrecked and destroyed at Barber. I wasn't supposed to be doing track days on it because it was a street bike, but I couldn't help myself. I've got a few bikes. And so I've already scanned this engine, and I've already scanned some of this car under the hood, under the trans tunnel, and I've already figured out the engine placement. I'll show you that here in a second. And I've already started with some motor mounts. So these are going to weld in. I'll show you how it all works. But this engine is going to be a screamer in this car for sure. And we're going to see exactly, I'm going to show you this process because I don't know exactly if this engine is going to be powerful enough for this car. But these engine mounts, let's see, they go something like that. Obviously they weld in, but that's probably not the exact place for that one. Maybe it's there, I don't know. First thing I got to do is cut out all these mounts that someone else put in. And then I'm going to fix some of this frame rail clearancing they did and try to make it not stock looking, but better than it is. Cut out all this tubing that was very poorly put in and just fix a lot of stuff. But I need to document all this because I want to be able to go back and look at what I've done and where I started. And this is a start. So I'm going to do this build in 2 phases. Since I'm not sure this engine is going to be powerful enough, it has more horsepower than the original engine, but it only has about 2/3 the torque. And, you know, the weight of the car, the torque's going to be kind of important. So I'm going to use the standard bike transmission, which is a 6-speed, and it's a sequential. So torque's not there, but we're going to have a shorter final drive ratio, and it's a close ratio gearbox. So I think it's not going to be a rocket ship off the line, but I think as soon as it gets first gear engaged and the clutch slip stops, it should be pretty adequate. Well, that's the hope. I'm not sure yet. But like I said, I'm going to do this in 2 stages. The first stage is going to be get the engine mounted and kind of, I'm not going to say half-ass, but kind of, well, okay, half-ass, mount everything it needs to run and drive. So I'll have the stock fuel tank for the bike, the stock radiator, all that stuff will be soft mounted, we'll call it, to where the car will run and drive, but nothing is done. And I just want to do that for the sake of, I want to drive the car around with this power plant and make sure it's going to have enough power to make the car fun to drive. It's not going to be a rocket ship. It's not going to be fast. Should be hopefully faster than the stock car was. But I want to drive it before I invest a lot of time and energy and money and then realize on the first drive it wasn't worth it. The engine's not big enough. But we'll see. I have seen this car at a show before I bought it, a year or 2 before, and took a picture of it. The hood was down, had the stock engine in it. When I bought the car, it came with a stock engine and transmission taken apart, and I weighed it all. Well, I didn't weigh it. I weighed that engine, and I've weighed the car. The car without a drivetrain is around 1,400 pounds. That engine is going to be around 130 to 150 pounds, all said and done. And the stock engine and trans, I think, is around 475 pounds. So hopefully, with seats and the 4-point cage and all that stuff, this car is going to be around 1,600 to 1,700 pounds. So with driver and all, it should be under 2,000 pounds and 140-ish horsepower. So like I said, not a rocket, but stock Miata speed maybe? I don't know. It's definitely going to sound good. That 3-cylinder is one of my favorite sounding engines. And we'll see. Maybe not a muffler, maybe a muffler. But going through all 6 gears, no lift shift, it's going to be cool. So here we have some of the scan data for the car and the engine in place. And you can see the motor mounts that I was talking about earlier and the steering shaft kind of going right through there. It's tight, but it'll work. So what I've done here is I've placed the engine as low and as far back in the chassis for a few reasons. Mainly to give me more room for a big airbox. Because you know anything about these engines, they need to breathe. They move a lot of air. And the bigger the airbox is, the more potential power and transient response you have. Now, I could put pod filters on it and lose some power, but gain some space. That'd be fine, but I want to keep as much power as I can. The oil drain is basically flush with the bottom of the car here. So I really didn't want to go lower than that. I may end up modifying the pan and adding capacity and changing the pickup a little bit. I don't know yet. You can see, let me turn the engine off. You can see some of this custom clearancing the previous owner did here, which, you know, is just wonderful. But it is what it is. That's how I bought the car. I knew it wasn't perfect. Let's look at the other side. Let's see. Yep. A little bit more. Looks like bell housing clearance. And then we'll turn them both back on. And you can see where the cross member is cut out for the transmission, which isn't the biggest deal because I'm not using the transmission. So not the worst thing in the world. But this is the start. This engine mount, there's another one here that's turned off. And then this one up here is going to be a little bit of a challenge because it's mounting on the other side. So the engine will actually be here. And this bolt right here, believe it or not, is the pivot for the throttle pedal. So I'm going to have to cut this corner out of the vehicle and make a new reverse corner basically for this pickup point on the head. Not ideal, but I'll make it work. I really should have probably just slid the engine a little bit farther forward and not had to deal with that, but I've already got these mounts made. Now I could get these recut out, modify it forward a little bit. I'm actually going to probably consider that so I don't have to chop this up, but we'll see. I think what I'm going to do next is mock up the engine, but unfortunately I can't mock it up in the chassis until I cut this section out. So I may play around with the design. I placed this engine in this, well, the scan of the engine in the scan of this car and did these motor mounts well over a year ago. And I don't really remember why I placed it so far back to where there was that much interference. So I am considering moving it a little bit now and then remaking the mounts, but we'll see. So I got those cut out. I got this side motor mount cut out and cut that little tab off, and you can see normally that tube protrudes up through the top of this frame rail here, and they've cut it all up, so I'll have to fix that. I pulled the steering rack off so I could get access to this side, and I've got this side cleaned up, roughed in a little bit. I'll do a little more cleanup work, but like I said, I'm going to build a section back up here to kind of fix this and make it look like it's supposed to be like that, because that's obviously been beat on and all tore up. So I'm also going to have to fill in all these holes in the firewall. Normally there's a heater box here, and this is just some really crude work. I'm going to fix all this, so probably going to end up pulling all the interior out, because you try to weld something on, this is carpet right here, and she goes up in flames. We don't want that. And whoever had this car before me started pulling this, I don't even know what you call this, but this is the cowl of the car, windshield, front fender. And they were pulling the front fender off. They got the bottom off, and they got some of these fender bolts out. But I don't know if this piece is supposed to stay with the cowl or maybe stay with the fender. It's some kind of beading, and it's like laid over the top. Now, obviously, they did a number on destroying it, trying to get it off, but it's that center piece there. So any of you MG people, oof, that's nice. Any of you MG people that know how that works, please let me know down in the comments, or give me a link to where I can buy a new one, or am I just screwed? I don't know. So that's going to be one challenge. The other challenge is going to be what to do with this front section here. Since the rail's been cut in half, I could just make a new piece, to go in and connect the dots, but I don't know if I want to. I may completely reconfigure this front end of this car and not run the stock grill and get rid of this piece and make new stuff. I don't know yet, but I'm going to kind of just figure that out as I go. They also ground off most of this VIN plate here. You can see the last two. And then this one's been bed linered over. So hopefully I don't have any issues registering this car. That would suck. These are our two main motor mounts. They're 3/16 steel, obviously laser cut and skeletonized for weight. But the majority of the force the engine's going to put on the chassis are going to go through those two. There's also a third one that comes up here that kind of loops around the steering column just as a stabilization. And then there'll be a supplemental fourth one here that ties in. I'll have to cut this corner out and rebuild it for that third or fourth mount. The only issue I really see is the thermal expansion. The engine, you know, the trans case mounts here, and then the head mounting there. Well, that engine's going to grow as it gets hot, 210, 215 degrees. And obviously in the bike it's a stressed member, but the frame is aluminum and will grow at a similar rate. It won't get as hot as the engine, but I'm trying to decide whether I want to make a floating engine mount for the cylinder head, and that's just because I don't want to put any extra stress on the engine by having it fight the chassis. So I think these main mounts are going to do 90-95% of the work, and I've just got to decide how I want to stabilize the engine. So that can kind of come later once I get the engine in place. I don't really think I'm going to need anything, but I'll probably throw something extra in just in case.